Now, getting into the tactics. On their arrival, he goes on to say, our tactics were predetermined, straitjacketed, predictable, and reactive. These rose only a little above what is known as minor tactics in military terminology. That is, tactical arraignments and drills at section and platoon level. Counterinsurgency operations demanded far more innovative and integrative formulations at company, battalion, and formation levels. This is obviously something that we had to deal with in Ramadi, and that was this idea of counterinsurgency. You know, it's infinitely more complex than a situation where, you know, two uniformed military groups are fighting against each other. Everything is clear. It's very easy to understand. You know, they have a different shaped helmet, they have a different colored uniform, and we're going to get on our different sides of the lines and we're going to go and destroy them. And an insurgency is just infinitely more complex. People mixed in with the populace swaying back and forth on who they support, wanting to protect the populace from the insurgents. Some of the populace supporting the insurgents and some of the populace supporting the host nation or the friendlies. It's just an infinitely more complex situation. How he explains it, counterinsurgency remains essentially a company and platoon commander's battle task. So he's saying that it is those front line guys that are actually going to make it happen. However, he goes on, their concerted, integrated, mutually responsive, and interconnected employment demands particularized tactics at battalion and brigade levels. And what that means is that the person who's overall in charge has got to do an outstanding job of explaining what the mission is and explaining how it's connected and explaining how what is going to happen on the front line is going to affect the broad strategy. That getting that commander's intent down to the front lines is critical. And this is something that when I was in Ramadi and I was working for Colonel Sean McFarland, who's now General McFarland, who is just an unbelievably outstanding leader, but he was able to get his intent, you know, from him to the battalions, to the companies, to the platoons, to the squads, and right down to the frontline leadership. Very, very similar situation that Colonel McFarland was able to execute in a just an outstanding way. So now we get to beyond the strategy or beyond the tactics, and as we talked about on the last podcast, what always interests me more is the principles of war and how different people in different situations see those principles and how those principles of war can be translated into principles of life and principles of business and principles of fighting and principles of relationships and everything that you're doing. And really also the principles of the war within. And the war that we have within ourselves to beat back the insurgents that are in our mind, you know, beat back the emotions that are in our mind that are trying to make us weak and trying to bring us down and trying to keep us from being the best that we can be. So those principles of war apply to so many different things, and that's why I find them so fascinating. And luckily enough, the good general has a section that's called Principles of War.